welcome to this week's Treasury Career Corner podcast. This is another catch-up with another amazing guest. When I originally spoke to Dana Laidhold, she was the treasurer at Peloton, based in New York, and I spoke to her way back in 2018. That's right, nearly 4 years ago. It was November 2018. We're recording this in the middle of 2022. She has then since moved on roles, which is great. She talks us through that, talks about what her experiences were like at Peloton. Again, I'll shut up. Let's get on with the show. This month, as you know, is all about women in Treasury. And as such, I'm delighted to be joined by Dana Laidhold, the treasurer at Peloton Interactive based in New York. Till recently, Dana was the treasurer at Carlyle, the private equity firm, before making a recent career move to join Peloton. Founded in 2012, Peloton is a global technology company that is reinventing fitness, if you like, by bringing studio-style workouts with their Peloton Bike, Peloton Tread, and Peloton Digital to the convenience and comfort of your home. As always, I'll be talking to Dana about how her career has developed, how she's built her career, where she is now, and where she sees herself and the treasury profession going next. As an experienced treasury finance professional, Dana's worked for both private and public companies, so we'll explore that a little bit about the differences. And also, she's been awarded things such as the Treasury Today's highly commended winner of the Woman of the Year award, recognition there. And also, Dana, I know, is very much involved in the AFP through the Association of Finance Professionals, the US Treasury Association, if you like, and I'm recently on their podcast, so really doing a lot of stuff. Was there at the Chicago show recently. And in addition to this, if she's not busy enough, she's also on the board of directors for Doorways for Women and Families, so who are an organisation that help out with pathways out of domestic violence, homelessness, and lots of other things. So where she gets the time, I don't know. But let's go back to the beginning of Dana's career, if we could, and then bring us up to date, and we'll jump around with some treasury issues and things like that. Dana, you started your career many years ago. You qualified. I think you graduated from Penn State. Is that right? Or back in the beginning?
I did. I went to Penn State for my undergrad, and then I got my master's in business administration from the University of Pittsburgh.
Right. Cool. So then did you think, right, that's it, Treasury's there for me, I want to go into it, or how did it come about, or what did you?
No, it was sort of an accidental fall into Treasury. Okay. I actually, when I left business school, I worked for U.S. Airways, which is now sort of folded into as American Airlines. I was in the finance department with them, and actually part of a management rotation program, which was a phenomenal experience, particularly being younger in my career, coming out of business school and wanting to broaden my skill sets. I did 6-month stints, and I was with the purchasing group, the financial planning group. I was with the pension and investments group, which was a phenomenal experience, and then also involved with the accounting team before settling into a role as a controller for them.
Okay.
And then sort of happenstance ended up falling upon the position at the Carlyle Group. It actually found me. I wasn't really looking for it, but it found me and made the move over to Carlyle, and was involved really not with Treasury at all, but with our internal co-investment programs, which are our programs that allow our employees to invest in our funds. Okay. Very involved on the bookkeeping side, doing tax work, financial statements, and also, which was more important to me, was involved with a lot of the programs around that. We were implementing an investment accounting system at the time, and I was involved with that. Then launching our first portal for investor reporting, looking at the loan programs we were putting in and how we were structurally interacting with the employees. Through my work in that area, Carlyle at that time was actually, relatively speaking, a pretty small company. It was global. It did have numerous funds, but it wasn't to the scale that it certainly is today.
Sorry, just take you on that. So how was that when you made a move? And that was an interesting thing for me. US Airways, huge, massive, to Carlyle. And you told me this before we had a chat the other day, and you said quite a small group. Was that quite a shift for you?
It was a shift in terms of going from a mature organization where the structure was very well established to moving to an organization where there was development work. There was a lot of departments and functions that were in more of a build mode at that time, which was a shift for me from really running a department and running the budgeting process and looking at, certainly there were implementations. When I was at US Airways, we were looking at speech recognition it was very new to the market at that time. Use of credit cards and portable Wi-Fi enabled equipment to allow credit cards onto the airplanes was, new and fancy at the time. And so, but the structure in and of itself was mature. We're coming into Carlyle. We were really looking at putting in, back office systems. We were putting in our investment accounting system. We went through the journey of putting in our ERP. So that was a nice shift for me to be able to kind of step backwards in the business and build things up a little more from the beginning.
And you got to know that. And then you said you started in co-investments, as it were, so looking after the money for the actual employees. How did then Treasury come about?
So at the time, we really only there was no finance function. We had the Office of the Controller, and it was a very GL-focused, accounting-focused group. But as the company itself just had grown in size and in scale and in complexity, it had reached an inflection point where they needed to break pieces off and put more concentrated effort around them, Treasury being one of them. So our CFO at the time had kind of said, I think we need a treasurer, had noticed some things about the organization and came to me and said, okay, Dana, you're now going to be our treasurer. And, my first response was, okay, sounds great. What do I do? What does a treasurer do? And, so began the journey where, we worked together and really looking across each of the functions and building them from scratch, starting with cash management, looking across all of our bank accounts, looking across our bank relationships, the services we were employing, the infrastructure we had in place, putting in automated payment technologies, and rationalizing that infrastructure, then kind of sidestepping into foreign exchange and looking at how we were trading, how we were tracking our trades, the technology we were using to build efficiency around our trades, the rates we were taking on the trades, how we were thinking strategically about foreign exchange in the organization and what our risks were. We put that in place. We put a term loan in place, a revolver in place. We then went out and sought a public rating. Then the company went public, and then we issued debt in the public markets. We issued 10-year bonds and 30-year bonds. And that was a capital structure and capital markets was a piece of the business, and really sort of walking around the patch, building each of the functions. And it was a wonderful and exciting journey.
And when you first, you say they said, here's Treasury, off you go. What roadmap did you put together, or what were your first bullet points? Did you say, right, where's the cash? Or, for some of the guys listening in the early stages of their careers, or they're walking in the door and someone saying, right, you're in charge of Treasury yourself. How did you come about it? What did you think? Right, this is the...
Yeah, well, I do think there was a matter of looking at where there was greatest need. Where was greatest risk? Where was greatest need? And for us, we had numerous bank accounts at the time. We had numerous bank partners. We were, all, across the globe. So that was for us the first piece of greatest need was getting, visibility into all the cash, automating that so it was efficient and it wasn't a manual process to collect and see the balances, putting in the right technology to enable that. And then also for us, one of our greatest needs was we had such a high volume of payments. We had outgrown scale of using bank proprietary portals. We have to key in all your payments. So we needed a transition to something more automated. And then also looking, this was all, back pre-crisis, there were very high returns to be made on holding cash balances. So being able to collect our arms around that in an efficient manner and then be able to invest the cash really generated a return for the business at the time, which was very important. Foreign exchange was another piece of that puzzle. And the volume of trades, looking at our exposures we had so that we were taking the right risk management approach, but then also looking at the trading, just spot trades that we were doing, and building infrastructure around that piece were some of our greatest things. And then we started walking into how we thought about debt and capital structure.
And then you said, as you said, the financial crisis happened. How did that, how were you guys set for that? Was it all, most of the stuff was in place by then, or because you started as treasurer?
We did. We had a lot of our infrastructure was in place by then. I think for us, really the greatest sort of source of time and energy during that period from Treasury's perspective was around where do we have cash balances, which financial institutions are they in, what paper are we holding, and which organizations are we holding paper in. And we were very, very fortunate. We didn't take a loss on anything that we had. We weren't, holding Lehman paper but cutting across that infrastructure very, very quickly. We did have cash in banks that we were concerned with their financial stability and had to very quickly move a lot of that money and consolidate cash across the platform to try to de-risk. And so, that was a very, very busy period of time. But, fortunately, I think we were very close and tight with our relationships. I think we had a pretty strong risk management framework, and I think we had our eyes open and we were seeing things as they were evolving, which allowed us to move quickly.
And when the group, moved from private to public ownership, when was that? When did that happen?
We went public in May of 2012.
Okay.
And so that was sort of, I would say, another piece of evolution to take. And for me personally, I really like the public company experience. I like the rigor and the discipline that it instills in an organization. I think, as a company, we were always, of course, very focused on doing everything right, having the right infrastructure, thinking about risk, trying to put the right controls in place. But when you are going to be a public company, you're now going to be subject to SOX. It puts a hammer in place that cuts through, well, this is how we've always done things, or sort of cultural resistance to maybe bureaucracy that certainly does come with internal controls. And so I actually felt that was a really comfortable place because we could use that rationalization to put in place things in a much stricter way. I found the internal control structure after that journey was just so tight, and it was always a top of mind item for everybody across the company, not just certain departments or certain issues at specific times.
Well, and it was different, obviously, the private to public. Was there any effect from external pressures that you suddenly more accountable to shareholders externally rather than, before you were just responsible to yourselves and to the management of things?
Well, I don't know if you would necessarily call that different. I think we always held ourselves to a very high standard.
Yeah.
But I do think once you have to, I would say it's not the standard that the outside investors are holding you to as much as the articulation of that and having to put pen to paper on how you're going to craft and share your story is probably more of where outsiders become important.
What do you mean by that? Sort of just explaining what you guys are doing within Treasury or within as a firm?
Exactly. I think there's a lot that you take for granted in your day-to-day operations.
Right.
And you don't always appreciate the things you're doing right, or maybe the things that could be tweaked along the way. And then when I think you have to explain that to an outside audience, even if it's, whether it's investors or just to your own, internal audit department, when you have to explain how your processes work, explain how your controls are, it makes you think about them in a different way. And it does help to make some tweaks and adjustment along the way. And it also helps you to appreciate all the things that you are doing a really great job on.
And you and I have talked about, and part of that journey is being the treasurer. You then became quite heavily involved in the AFP. Just for, again, some of the European listeners, they know the organization a little bit maybe, but, it's obviously in the US, it's very well known as the Association for Treasurers and for finance professionals across there. But can you just explain a bit more about your involvement with, because you're on the board and you've led that as well?
Sure. And actually, unfortunately, I'm not on the board any longer. I was on the board. But for me, because I was coming into being a treasurer, really without experience, I didn't grow up in a treasury department, so I didn't have the benefit of really seeing how a treasury department functions and all the and all of the nuts and bolts about that. So I kind of came into this cold, which in some ways was great because I didn't bring any baggage with me along the way. But at the same time, I didn't exactly know what I was doing all the time in the beginning. And so building a network of peers was invaluable to me as a resource. And I had a woman who was a consultant that we worked with as we were standing up a lot of our infrastructure, who I was very fortunate was involved in the AFP and told me about it right at the very beginning of my taking over this position. So I started by going to some of the local roundtables and doing some of the virtual roundtables and listening to some of the training programs that were out there on specific topics. And through that, I was able to ask a lot of questions. I was able to listen a lot, and I was able to develop a network of peers that I could call and ask things to on a more one-on-one basis. And so that benchmarking was really valuable to me and helped me hear things that I could take an issue, foreign exchange, and talk to 20 or 30 people about what they're doing in their companies. And I could pick all the pieces that I thought would be the best practices and best fit for our organization and then implement those. And so, it really was, almost like an MBA of, Treasury.
Yeah, it sounds like a real world version of LinkedIn. When I spoke at the, Chicago, the AFP, and I was saying to people, it's a great way using LinkedIn if you've got a new treasury management system, or as you say, if you've got an FX issue, you go out to your network, say, guys, who can help me on this? Who's got some advice? But you actually got involved with that with the AFP, so it's actually a real world way of doing it.
It was, and different from LinkedIn. I would go to roundtables and actually meet people, and I could develop a more personal relationship with them. And I could call them and talk to them about specific issues offline. And that personal connection was really important for me. And like I said, it was really invaluable. It was the key to my success. And I would not have been able to do everything that I did in Treasury without being able to have those people there. And so for me, as then I got more involved in the AFP, and then I found that over, a couple of years, I switched from being going to these roundtables and being the listener and coming with a list of questions that I wanted to ask the group community to, I was a talker. And I was giving back and I was sharing my experiences, which was wonderful. And then that grew to, I started speaking on some of the panels and then got to know the leadership over there more. And then ultimately, I was called by someone that there were some open board seats and what I submitted an application. And for me, that was just the ultimate way to be able to give back to an organization that I had taken so much from, was being able to sit on the board. And it was something that I really enjoyed.
That's amazing. And you unfortunately weren't on the panel that we hosted recently because you recently made a career move and everything else. We'll come on to that in a moment. But one of the things that we were talking about, one of the stepping stones to career success, we talked about mentoring and coaching, and you've had benefit of both. And one of the things, I spoke to Karen van der Driesche on last week's show, and she was very much talking about the benefits it gave her. But we discussed this, and you said it was tremendous for you because you've had both. Is that right?
I have been very lucky in my career to have very special people that I've been able to build a personal connection with. And some of that comes in the form of people that have worked on my team that I learned from. Some of that has come in the form of my peer group, and people that I can share ideas with at my own level. And a lot of that has come from people that I've reported to who have really taken an interest in me and my personal career development and given me opportunities to grow and succeed. I also was fortunate that I did go through a coaching program. I had a formal coach for about a year. And that to me was a tremendous conversion, because I think people have numerous points along their career when they can use a coach, hands down. For me, that point was really when I was shifting from, being what I would call sort of the doer to being the leader of what there is to do. And that shift to really being a department head, not just a member of the department. And as you go through that shift, it was very easy for me to have a mission, sit down, run the numbers, come up with a model, push a process through, develop policies or procedures. I could steamroll through things that way.
Yeah.
But then you reach a point where you're more senior, and now you have to say not just what am I going to do, but what should we be working on? How should the department look? What should the next thing we do? Where is that risk? And what should the answer be to how we will solve that? And you start to focus on managing people. So you're not just managing your work, but you're managing people and their career path and what motivates them and what feedback do they need, what training do they need, what coaching do they need from you. And you're also interacting with your peer set differently, and that now you're all trying to steer the ship. And that's a more difficult landscape to work within when you have, a lot of different cooks in the kitchen all trying to steer things. And how do you work with your set of, senior peers? And so for me, that was a...
Sorry, go on.
No, sorry. I said for me, that was a really valuable point in my career where I had a coach to help me make that transition.
Yeah, that move, and again, when I was talking to Karen and talking to a couple of other people as well, and I was speaking at the Vienna Treasurers Conference just last week, and we got talking about this, and we talked about it in the speech. And one of the things that we talked about was the shift from the I and doing, still being a leader, but I will do this, I do, and actually then interacting and bringing people on board with that journey and being the we. Understanding and coaching others and bringing them along with you, sort of hand-holding, rather than just be the leader out there with the flag, but actually being the leader at the back, coaching people.
I agree. And one of the things that I've really learned now through doing numerous large-scale projects and implementations is the importance of culture and bringing culture along with you. It's something I definitely didn't appreciate much earlier on in my career. And now as I think about infrastructure and change or technology or systems, I realize it's not just about what it's enabling and what it's going to do for you, but how are you going to bring the rest of the group along? And that's actually more important as a key to success.
And when you're looking at that team ethos and you're bringing those people on board, so say when you're, we're on a recruitment podcast at the end of the day, when you're recruiting, what are you looking for in terms of that personality, attitude, or is it, paper first and qualifications? You must have CTP and things, or where's your mind at?
Well, I do think there's a little of everything. I do think it's very role dependent as well. I really love to bring senior analysts into my group. I love to bring people in where I can just look for someone who just has raw smarts, raw talent, very energetic, very enthusiastic, and an eagerness to learn, and then to work with those people to give them more of the treasury specific information and bring them through the organization. That to me is the most exciting area to hire into. But I do think also as you move up and you need to bring people in at a more senior level, not every person on the team comes in as a staff or senior person and moves up the ranks. Sometimes you have to airdrop someone in at a higher level. Mm-hmm. And as you get to those higher levels, that's when I do think specific treasury experience, specific skill sets, involvement through the AFP, knowledge of treasury systems, it becomes a more important piece of the overall resume.
Because they also have to hit the ground running, and you've got pressures on you as a treasurer and as an organisation as well.
Right.
So you've got that. You've got your involvement with the AFP. We talked about mentoring there. A Woman of the Year award as well. What how was that recognised?
They must not have had a lot of candidates that year.
I'm sure they did.
I was so honored. It was through the Treasury work. Obviously, we align very, very closely to our banks. I don't think of our banks as service providers as much as partners, right, and keys to our success as an organization. And I was very fortunate to have a number of very close banking partners that I was working with. And one did nominate me for the award, and then I was so humbled to actually have been selected. And it's still, I keep my award at my desk, and it's something that's very important and near and dear to my heart.
So Dana, also, one of the things that we talked about recently was about having, and Craig, my colleague, he really talks about having a legacy and giving back, and not just being focused, as you talked about, the I and the we in the team, and just focused just on treasury, but it can lead to other things as well. And I think you've done other things and contributed in other areas. Is that right?
Yeah, so I was on the board of Doorways for Women and Families, which is an Arlington-based organization that creates pathways out of domestic violence and homelessness for women and their families. For me, that was an important inflection in my career, was to be able to reach a point where I had reached a level where I could balance work and life a little better. I have 2 children, and getting them to a point where I could make some space for other things that were important to me, and really focusing on my community was important. And I got to know Doorways through a friend and the amazing work that they were doing around Virginia, and I just felt compelled to have to jump in and help there. And so I do think it's really important for people to try to find their passion, that I look for life as sort of a 3-way stool between your profession, your family, and then also your community and how you're participating in the community.
And then more recently, you've made quite a big career shift, as people might be able to see, to Peloton. But more than that, as you say, location-wise, it's quite a shift for you. And you're balancing that. And we talked about this in a pre-brief call, that, you've thrown everything up, and then seeing where the pieces fall. I mean, fantastic for everyone, but interesting as well. So perhaps explain to the listeners where that is, because I think it was, I came off our initial call, it was like, wow, this lady doesn't just feet up, that's it, relax. You go for it. So explain a bit more, if you would.
I do. Well, I do think life is about finding your happiness. And I think that means very different things at different points for everybody. And, I had a lot of tremendous energy and enthusiasm in all the years that I was in Carlisle, and building that department was just an incredible experience for me, and something that just I had a continuous sense of pride about. But then I had been there for 16 years, and that was a really long time to be in one place. And I had reached a point of stability and complacency. And for me, that's not where I find my happiness. That I like that. I like the chaos. Someone had said to me, it's really important to be able to play in traffic. And that those words sort of echo through my head constantly as I think about what I'm doing now. And so I sort of took the puzzle of my life, and I threw it up in the air, and all the pieces have kind of rained down in different spots, because I'm now commuting and coming up to New York. So I've had to find a different arrangement in terms of work-life balance and the time I'm spending with my family. I am back to scratch again at a younger organization where we're building out the treasury functions, which is just tremendously exciting for me. I am meeting all new people who are just amazing and bright, and I have so much that I can learn from them. I think that sort of shaking it up and changing your circles of who you're interconnecting with is tremendously educational. Different people always bring a different perspective. And that's just been one of the most exciting parts of this change for me, is getting a whole new sphere that I'm surrounding myself with of thought leadership and ideas.
And you, as you say, this came at you sort of out of the blue. Something you knew someone or were connected, but then Peloton as a group and as a brand and a company, it's relatively new. Some people might see it and they might see the adverts, but to tell the listeners,
sure,
it's a stationary bike. So what? I could do this in my living room. What's the big dream with the company?
Well, Peloton as a brand, it sits at the nexus of fitness, technology, and media. Through our bike, tread, and Peloton Digital, we're really changing the way people get fit through a comprehensive and socially connected experience. Our platform makes every workout efficient, addictive, and it's accessible anytime and anywhere. For our content, we have 10,000 live and on-demand classes. The classes are taught by a roster of elite instructors who deliver real-time motivation, curated playlists from all the world's best artists. We're actually headquartered here in New York City, but recently we've expanded internationally, and we have showrooms in the UK and in Canada.
But when you walked in, again, as you said, blank sheet of paper for Treasury, or was there some Treasury there? Or
it was similar to Carlisle, where there were Treasury functions, but they weren't centralized under a single treasurer. So now I'm coming in and carving out those pieces and then growing them.
And where do you see the future for Treasury with the group as it grows? Because obviously it's rapid growth, international, it's a fitness business or an internet business, or it's both.
It's both. It's really connected fitness is what it is. And it really is a technology company focused on the fitness space. And the growth potential is really, we've been growing at over 100% year over year. and really even touch just a small portion of the total available market that's out there for this equipment. We've launched in the UK, we've launched in Canada, there'll be other countries that come online over time. So as we look at Treasury, how do we think about banking? How do we think about now we have foreign exchange components to the business? As the capital structure develops, and how are we thinking about the balance sheet? How do we look at payables, receivables? We're really dissecting in Treasury all the different elements of the balance sheet, and then building out the more solid infrastructure around them.
And you've obviously been through this journey once before with Carlisle and everything else. Not saying made mistakes, but what things this time round, when you're looking at this iteration, if you like, what things are you doing differently, or what tools are there available to you now that you're thinking this is so much easier than it was when I started it in 2010, or what are you seeing? It's a question about the future of Treasury.
I think one of the things that's really different about my doing this now versus when I was doing it then is I'm so much more educated on the space now. Right. Back then I really had to learn, develop a view, and then implement that view. And, I didn't quite have as much confidence, frankly, because I didn't want to make mistakes along the way. So it took a lot longer to research and learn each piece. Now I do have a lot more experience. I have a lot more education about the technology landscape, what's available. I have lessons learned that I've made along the way. I've seen a lot more from my peer group and what other companies have done. And so I'm much more nimble in being able to jump in and know exactly how I want each function to look. And then it's just executing.
So when, I was talking to, as I say, when I was doing one of the speaking sessions the other day, I suggested to people that they look at goal roles. And what I mean by that is if people wanted to check out the LinkedIn profiles of people in similar roles that perhaps, 5-10 years. So if someone else wants to follow your career path, they might look at your LinkedIn, or they might, and then look at the career choices you made. And they could say, actually, I would make that choice, and how long you've remained in roles and how you developed as a person. I mean, just to sort of summarize with you, what would you give us? If someone wants a career as successful as yours, what advice would you offer or give them? They walk in and say, Dana, I want to, follow in your footsteps. What would you say?
Well, I do think, I honestly think you need to let your career happen to you. I think there's a management element to your career, but also there's, I was very, very fortunate that I was in an organization at the time that they were breaking out Treasury, and I was offered that opportunity. I was very fortunate that, a friend knew the CFO here at Peloton, and they were having a conversation, and she was saying they need a treasurer. And my friend said, well, you need to call Dana Laidhold. Those things you can't create, but what you can do is focus on, being the best possible you in every situation. And I know that probably sounds trite or, like a cliche, but, I was offered the Treasury opportunity at Carlisle because I had done a really good job on the things that I was doing prior. The CFO had confidence in me and knew that I could navigate a, non-linear organization. Knew that I was hardworking and I could put my head down and do what it took to figure things out. Demonstrating those qualities about yourself are what make you eligible, make you for top of mind when the opportunity set comes up. And, I look at, working your network, and I've always rolled my eyes when people say that, frankly. And I don't know exactly what that means. But, 20 years later into my career, I can see where the people that I've met and people that I've cultivated relationships with and considered friends, I didn't really think of myself as I'm building my network. I just looked at me as having friends, but how those friends are actually then the ones who are sponsoring you and advocating for you along the way. So to, take your head up and focus on the people who are around you. That's something that I haven't always appreciated.
I couldn't summarize it better. I think that was a fantastic end to today's show. What I would say, or check with Dana. Obviously, Dana's on LinkedIn, and we spoke about this before. LinkedIn, the best way, you would say?
Yes.
Right. So we'll put Dana's details into the show notes. Obviously, look at Peloton, really interesting company, growing rapidly and everything else. Dana, thanks for your time today. Unless there are any final words, I just think it was a fantastic interview.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate your spending time with me today. This has been a pleasure.
Thanks very much. Wow. So I hope you enjoyed that. That was, well, from a while ago, actually. We recorded that episode way back in, I think, October 2018. So that was talking to lovely Dana Laidhold then. We're now going to bring you up to date with her. So, Dana, you joined the group, Peloton, and bring us up to date with your story, if you like, because you made a move, the group was developing, amazing journey. So talk us through up to now, if you would. Back to you.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Really exciting to be back here talking with you. I went back and re-listened, and it really is amazing where I was at that time when we did the podcast. I had only been at Peloton for 2 months, and it really is amazing to kind of think of all that's happened over the past few years since that time. Really, at that point in time, I just started, kind of really figured out what my plan was and where the needs were for Treasury, and had begun the process of putting functions and systems in place. And over about an 18-month period of time after that, I was really, really focused on infrastructure. At the time, I was the only person in Treasury at Peloton. We hired a team. We brought in people from around the company and really put together what Treasury came and grew to around 40 people. We kind of went through each area and dug in on policies, procedures, processes, really putting in best of breed technology to try to ensure the infrastructure was really highly scalable, and then putting the people in place to be able to run the day to day. So at the time, we looked at AP, AR, cash management, foreign exchange, insurance, consumer financing, merchant processing, capital markets. And I can kind of go on because the company was so young at the time. Each function had sort of seeds that were existing, but really needed to be built out in their entirety.
Just want to touch on that because you alluded to, and you and I spoke before, that you'd taken your experiences from Carlisle. You then had your sort of little black book, if you like, and you just said about how you accelerated the process when you got there to Peloton. Well, if people are listening today, do you think, and they're in that role before they go to join a Peloton type program, how should they be taking their notes, or what were you doing in the background?
I do think having gone through this process once before was tremendously helpful in order to move fast. So when I went through this journey of building out Treasury, at Carlisle, there was a lot of research, a lot of education that needed to come into play. Every decision we made needed to really dig in and understand all the pros and cons and what every alternative was. This time, I knew the answers to all the questions. And it was really what inspired me to want to go to Peloton in the first place, is to be able to redo that journey again with all of my lessons learned along the way. And so what had taken me, around 10 years to build out at Carlisle, we put in place in an 18-month period of time at Peloton. And it's because we could go right to decision making. We put in a Treasury workstation and obviously did an RFP and looked, and we were thoughtful about the process, but I already knew what features I wanted, what functionality. I knew all the technology players that were in the market, and I kind of knew what I wanted. And so the RFP we were able to do in about 4 weeks because it was more of a validation exercise. And in each area was like that. I had worked very closely with Chatham for 15 years. And, when it came time for us to start to put our plan together for FX, I knew who to call. They came in, they helped us. We could move very quickly through the process. And so, there is something to be said for, that learning and development, but then there's also something from, experience and having done things before that really enables you to move quickly. And that was key to success in this journey with Peloton.
When you got to Peloton, it was, as you said, and then you had to build a team. As you built out that team, what was in the back of your mind? Were you thinking, right, which areas do we focus on first? Or because you'd had that past experience again of this was your second time round, if you like, in some ways, right, I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to focus on this area. Or how did you sort of build it out?
I spent my first 6 to 8 weeks at the company figuring out my plan. I dug in on where are the greatest needs, where are the greatest risks, was able to then prioritize what we needed to do first, second, third, and fourth. And so then was able to put also in place working on multiple areas at the same time, and then being able to partly using the resources that were at Peloton and leveraging some of the people who were there and bringing them into the Treasury team, which was wonderful, but then also hiring based on very specific skill sets that each area needed. So brought in someone who was the director of operations, who had a lot of cash management experience, brought in someone to oversee credit and capital markets, who had a lot of experience in her background through two different companies that she had worked for and focused on those areas, and then filling in the teams underneath them.
Then you moved on. This is great to catch up, but you went through that journey with the group, and then it was time for a change, or bring us up to date sort of thing as we went through that, in your own words, if you like, rather than me quiz you all the time.
Sure. So like I said, we put the foundation in place, which I think is critically important. Your processes, procedures, SOX, controls all enable the business to work really smoothly and really efficiently. And then that frees up capacity and time to be able to focus on really highly strategic areas. So things like, at Peloton, we took the company public. The Treasury team was involved in several acquisitions and looking at the acquisitions, but then also the integrations. We issued a convertible note and additional equity, and really being able to think very crisply around liquidity and capacity and the markets and places that we could add value because we had the infrastructure shored up and really running smoothly. Obviously, there's continuous optimization.
Yes.
Well, I don't think I would be curious if any treasurer out there thinks that their department is fully optimized and perfect. I think we're all a work in progress all the time. So that was, a really great place to get to. And then, as you know, Mike, I'm currently now at Nasdaq and sort of made another shift in my career journey, which I think is an interesting story as people think about their network. The CEO of Nasdaq was the CFO at Carlyle for several years, and I had the pleasure of working directly for her on several really intense projects. And we had really gotten to know each other professionally, but then also personally. Yeah. And so had stayed in very close touch for, 10 or so years after she had left Carlyle. And so when the opportunity came up at Nasdaq that they were looking for a treasurer, the opportunity to come back and work with her again was just so wonderful for me. And so was able to make the shift. And now pretty much at the same place in my journey at Nasdaq as I was when we last talked and where I was at Peloton. I've only been here about 4 months and just kind of in the beginning phases.
Yeah, it's like a repeat. It's history repeating itself in a good way.
Yes, although this is a very different journey too, because at Peloton, everything was very building focused, and Nasdaq's a much more mature organization, has really great systems, controls, processes in place. I think so much of the technology, is aspirational from a treasury standpoint, having come, from organizations where we had to put in the technology from scratch. And so this is a different place in terms of really thinking about optimizing, enhancing, and also, as businesses are constantly changing, platforms have to be constantly changing. And so taking it through that evolution.
And with yourself and that new, so if you like, in one back pocket, you've got the Carlyle experience, and you've got Peloton on the other side. And now, as you say, you're coming into a more mature organization, different kind of environment. We're not going to get into anything that's confidential. That's not the intention, but it's more, how are you then approaching it maybe differently? Are you then going out to the business differently, or how are you approaching it now? You sort of sat back and, as you said, your boss has said, right, get stuck in, how are you approaching it, if you like?
Yeah, so I do think where, in the past, I've had to be much more involved with day-to-day operation because things were constantly being built. And in here, we have so many of the structures in place and such a tremendous, wonderful team that I've been so honored to be able to work with since coming here. And so I really had to think about myself and my leadership style differently in delegating and the team, really taking ownership of all of the areas that they're focused on. And that allows me to focus more on capital markets and capital structure and overall liquidity management. Nasdaq's an investment grade company. It's rated, it issues frequently in the capital markets. And so that's been kind of a shift for me to be able to focus more on those areas.
Jenny, you've been very kind to sort of come back on the show, so I'm not going to take up
too much more of your time. But as we did before, we're going to put in your updated LinkedIn profile, as it were, in the show notes. But again, you and I spoke before. We've evolved the show a little bit, moved on. I'm going to let you have the closing words. You had amazing advice for everyone earlier on, which they listen to. But now bring us up to date. If you like, what final say would you have and give to those Treasury folks listening today?
My favorite quote recently is a Glennon Doyle quote that says, she says, "We can do hard things." And when I heard that, it just meant so much to me, and it really set a spark. I actually had stickers made that say, "We can do hard things." And I've stuck them on my children's computers and on my computer, and I have them around my office. And I found that to be so inspirational because at first, it said a lot to me in terms of like going through hard things and kind of said, you can do it kind of attitude. But it also, on the flip side, I find it inspires me to try to do hard things and to seek out hard things and to always be living on a path of continuous learning and continuous development. So we can do hard things. And, I hope everyone can find a little inspiration in that.
Hello, it's Mike here again. I hope you enjoyed this week's show. If you did, then maybe you want to follow the show or subscribe, depending on where you listen, whether that's iTunes, Spotify, or another great place to listen to the show from. It's totally free and means that you'll be the first to see each and every week when we release a new show. And maybe whilst you're there, you could even leave a quick review. Reviews and ratings are among the most important metrics for a podcast to effectively rank. And as you can probably appreciate, the podcast is a lot of hard work to produce every week. It'd be amazing. Just take, say, 20 seconds, leave a quick review of my amazing guests and their great career stories. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks very much, and I can't wait to see you soon.